All
right, thank you very much. Good morning to our viewers and our listeners on radio. And then good morning to my co-panelists.
Good morning.
Let me also say good morning to all members of the Socialist Movement of Ghana, those watching us and listening to us all over the country in all our collectives. You see, my co-panelists have laid a very solid foundation about the issues in Benin. The issues in Benin is just a symptom of the deeper crisis within the governance architecture that has been imposed on us on the sub-region. It is a clear manifestation of the contradictions that exist within the bourgeois democracy that has been imposed on us. Let's look at this historically. Benin between 1960s downwards to 1990 or to 1980s enjoyed or witnessed several coups d'etats. Then in 1970, Matthew Kereche took over as head of state, and that stabilized Benin for some time. And Matthew Kereche was one of the leaders who resisted French imperialism. He was one of the leaders who fought against the French colonial pact. Unfortunately for him, he was sabotaged, and they used all kinds of machinations to cripple him. And he had to go to the IMF and one of the requirements was that he returns Benin to democracy. And he also signed up to the ERPs and then SAPs. That's Economic Recovery Program, the Structural Adjustment Program, that imposed severe austerity measures on all the countries that implemented it, including Ghana. And in Ghana, I'm told that, some of us are young. In Ghana, I'm told that the consequences of the SAPs and ERPs was such that they had to introduce another program called PAMSCAD, program to mitigate the impact of the Structural Adjustment Program. And so, unfortunately, Kereche was caught up in that web. And he organized an elections in 1991. Benin was the first country in West Africa to move from a military rule to a democratic rule. And unlike President Rawlings in 1992, who won the 1992 elections, Matthew Kereche lost the 1991 election, and he accepted the outcome of the election results. Then he contested again in 1996 and then won, and then left power in 2006. Now, after the 2006, when he was about leaving power to hand over to President Yahya Boni, there were calls that he should extend his tenure because he had governed so well. But he respected the democracy, he respected the constitution that he drew up for Benin, and then stepped aside for Yahya Boni to take over. And so it tells you that Benin has enjoyed some level of democracy since 1991. And they have been stabilized since 1991 until President Talon took over in 2016, taking over from Yahya Boni. Now, the French colonial pact alone imposed severe consequences on the people of Benin, coupled with the implementation of the Economic Recovery Program and the Structural Adjustment Program. All this imposed severe hardships on the people of Benin. And so there are a lot of hardships, there are a lot of inequalities, there are a lot of injustice that the people of Benin are suffering. Then, President Talon takes over and then begins not just perpetuating or implementing policies that will intensify the hardships the people of Benin are facing, but also begin to gag political opponents, arrest political opponents. In fact, even the former president of Benin, President Yahya Boni, who was former chairperson of ECOWAS, was sentenced to house arrest for disagreeing with the government on an issue. So just imagine in Ghana, a president wakes up and say, let's say President Mahama wakes up and say, President Akufo-Addo has disagreed with him, so he's putting President Akufo-Addo to house arrest. Can you imagine the consequences of this action? President Talon did it freely. And interestingly, all this while ECOWAS was quiet. Yahya Boni is their former chairperson, and he has been affected, yet ECOWAS was quiet. Again, the former finance minister under Yahya Boni's administration, who was a contender in the 2021 elections in Benin, Komi Kuchi, was also sentenced to 20 years in prison for alleged abuse of power and embezzlement and what have you. And the basis for doing this was that an audit has been conducted. And everybody who is familiar with the process of auditing knows that if observations are raised and queries are raised, you are given the opportunity to respond. Yeah. He wasn't given the opportunity to respond. And interestingly, President Talon's personal lawyer, who was the Minister of Justice, was moved from Minister of Justice to become the head of the constitutional courts in Benin, just to be able to prosecute political opponents. And the US, of all people, conducted an investigation in the matter and said that what President Talon was doing was just persecuting his political opponents and not in the interest of promoting accountability and transparency in governance. Yet ECOWAS watched him do all these things. In fact, in the last elections, out of 20 candidates who intended to contest the presidential elections, only 3 of them contested. And all these 3 were linked to President Talon. All the 3 of them were from his own party, or they are parties that are linked to him. Just as in Ghana, we know the smaller parties, how they are affiliated and what have you. And one of the requirements that President Talon, through his influence over the Electoral Commission, did was that for you to qualify to contest, you must get nominations from about 60% of all members of their National Assembly, what we will call Parliament in our contest. And majority of the people serving in the National Assembly were members of Talon's administration and were aligned to Talon. So if you want to contest, how do you get these people to endorse you? That was the level of suppression of democracy in Benin. In fact, you also require endorsement from their local governance leaders, what we will refer to as the MMDCs, the DCs, the mayors, and what have you. And all these people are appointed by the president, who is also contesting the elections. So how do you get these people to endorse your nominations? And so in the last election, President Talon won with 86%. Can you imagine? And the voter turnout were very, very low because the people of Benin were tired of his leadership. So only people within his party and people affiliated to him, showed up to vote in the last elections. So all these are part of the crisis that were ongoing in Benin. Aside the austerity measures that has been imposed by the French colonial parts, the ERPs, and this political suppression, they were also faced with the challenge of terrorism. They also faced with the challenges of what? Terrorism. And interestingly, there's one interesting dynamics. Terrorism has been a challenge within the sub-region, especially in the Sahel countries. Now, these countries also had the presence of the French military base in those countries, especially Mali, Niger, and the Burkina Faso. And whilst these countries were holding French military to aid them fight terrorism, the level of terrorism kept rising in these countries. In Mali, in Burkina Faso, in Niger, in Nigeria, and recently in Benin. So, after the people of these countries, Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, the French military weren't kicked out by the government. It's the people who kicked the French military out of their countries. And the people welcomed the coup d'etat in these Sahel states. Right after the French military was kicked out, reports indicate that the level of terrorism in these countries has begun declining in these countries. So there's a direct correlation, and those in academia will tell you correlation and regression analysis. There's a direct correlation between the presence of French military and the rise of terrorism in these countries. Now in Benin, after the French military were kicked out of Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, they moved their troops into Benin. And just as they moved into Benin, the level of terrorism kept rising in Benin. So you don't need, some deep analysis to understand this. And you can't convince me that the terrorism happening in these countries is as a result of a weird religious belief. The evidences are clear. The presence of French military, increases the level of terrorism. And just as President Trump announces that Christians are being killed in Nigeria, and if the Nigerian government does not deal with terrorism, he will move in to save Christians in Nigeria. Just as he made the announcement, terrorism in Nigeria has also risen. So you can do the analysis. You can look at the happenings and make your own, conclusions. So the people of Benin were facing these challenges. In fact, the consequences were said that even earlier this year, the Benin military had an exchange with the terrorists for about 7 to 8 hours. And out of that, 30 soldiers died. And this is a Benin military that are being controlled, that get intelligence with the help of the French army. Yet they are unable to combat these terrorists. So even the military in Benin were angry about the situation. We're not happy about the situation. The people in Benin were not happy about the situation. Because if you're a military man and constantly military men are dying, you'll be scared for your life. If your family is a military man, you'll be scared for him. So the people of Benin themselves were not happy. The military were not happy. Coupled with the high levels of poverty. And see, when you go to places, especially in northern Benin, places like Zougou, places like Parakou, places like Bonikwara and Co., the levels of poverty is so unbelievable. People do not have access to education. And I've been to Zougou before. People do not know anything about formal education. Not because they don't want, because access to formal education is very, very low. Access to healthcare is very, very low. Access to basic social services is very, very low. So that is the problem Benin was dealing with. That's what problem Benin was dealing with. So on December 7th, what we saw wasn't just a group of military people who just wanted power. It is as a result of a systemic problem inherently within a global governance system that has been imposed on us. And so the coup d'etat by Lieutenant Colonel Pascal Tigri, that's the name of the leader, received a lot of support from the people, even within the military. The military supported the coup, and there are reports to indicate the people supported. In fact, there are even reports that people were jubilating. But for the intervention of the French military within Benin and the intervention of Nigeria, and my co-panelists have mentioned about how France can influence Nigeria. Interestingly, just before December 7, President Macron was in Nigeria to have a visit, to pay a state visit to President Tinubu and all those stuff. And right after Macron left, the coup d'etat happened. So most of these things are calculated. You just have to analyze it carefully and identify the lines. So Macron visits Nigeria. Probably they might, this even our communication gadget, everything. People pick intelligence, in all sorts of means. And so a coup will happen on December 7th, just 2 or 3 days before December 7th. President Macron is in Nigeria, pays a state visit to Tinubu. Right after he leaves, a coup d'etat happens. And then Nigeria is instructed to intervene in Benin to save the coup. In fact, but for the intervention of the Nigerian army and the intervention of the French military, the coup d'etat will have been successful because it will have received popular support, just as it happened in Burkina Faso, in Mali, and in Niger. In fact, currently, as we speak now, President Talon does not trust the Benin military to even guard the presidential palace. It is the French military and the Nigerian army that are guarding the presidential palace as we speak now. Yeah. So, clearly, President Talon has lost legitimacy. Has lost legitimacy. And before we started, you read a story that even the constitution has been amended to allow the president to go for 7 terms instead of 5 terms and all those things.
Yeah, 7 years.
All these things are part of the crisis that the people of Benin were going through. So it is not a fluke that these things are happening in Benin. Now, beyond what is happening, let's look at ECOWAS. ECOWAS for some time now only exists to protect their colleagues. It's just a group of heads of states who are there to protect each other. They are not there for the working people or the ordinary people of West Africa. They are just there to protect each other. Now, in Guinea-Bissau, president realizes that he is losing an election. Then the head of presidential guards comes to announce that he has seized power and he has conducted the coup d'etat. ECOWAS is silent on that. Yet, an ordinary soldier announces that he has taken power, and then ECOWAS are now issuing statements and want to send in military and all those stuff. So it tells you that the ECOWAS as an institution does not exist for the interest of the working people of West Africa. They only exist to protect themselves as leaders. Now, Gbagbo has changed the constitution to go for a 4th term. Ouattara. And I mean, Ouattara fought Gbagbo.
Yes.
Okay. And Ouattara has changed the same thing Ouattara fought against Gbagbo. He has, also done it in multiple folds. And interestingly, at his inauguration, President Akufo-Addo, who is former chairperson of ECOWAS, graces his inauguration. President Mahama, who is former chairperson of ECOWAS, graces his inauguration. President Mahama, who is former chairperson of ECOWAS, AU champion on reparation, and ECOWAS's candidate for AU chairperson in 2027, graces his occasion to give him legitimacy. And it's a problem.
Maybe one should do the same way.
Well, I mean, I'm very happy. I'm very happy the National Democratic Congress has issued a statement saying that, look, this is a no-go area. I know, and this is a no-go area. You can't try this in Ghana.
Right. But beyond that, too, he himself has stated categorically that he will not be on the ballot paper.
I mean, it's easier to mobilize people around dissent or being suppressed to share their opinion, and so it will be a catastrophe if they should try that.
Never say never.
Well, let's see what happens. So, ECOWAS really has not, lived up to expectation. But I mean, there's a whole history as to the creation of ECOWAS and even the kind of dissent between Nkrumah and Nyerere around creation of regional blocks and having just one organization. I mean, that's the whole conversation we can have another time. So, if this coup d'etat had succeeded, there will be several implications. In fact, let's also state it's clear that all coups do not have the same character. There was a coup d'etat in Guinea, but the character of the coup d'etat in Guinea is different from the character of the coup d'etat in Niger. It's different from the character of the coup d'etat in Mali and Burkina Faso. And currently, people are looking up to Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger as an example. And anytime you hear coup d'etat, people just look up to this country and say, look, these countries came, or these leaders came through coup d'etat, but they are doing things for the benefit of their people. But let's place on record that not all coup d'etats, have the same character. And not all coup d'etats really serve the aspiration of working people. Let's be clear on that.
Yeah.
Not all coup d'etat will serve the aspirations of working people. And not all democratic governance serve the interests of working people. Let's also make that clear. But if the coup d'etat had taken the character like Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso, there will be a total change in the dynamics of West Africa. One, because Niger will now have a trusted neighbor in Benin, okay, and they will be able to use the sea routes of Benin for easy trade. That means that Ghana and other countries will also lose the traffic that we get from these countries, because these countries using our ports means that we are getting revenues. So if Benin now opens up their port for these people, these countries, then the trade dynamics will change. Again, politically, it means that ECOWAS will now be left hanging, because most of their countries are now, joining the Alliance of Sahel States. Even Ghana, the president is making effort to amend the relationship between Ghana and the AES countries. Remember, President Akufo-Addo went to report Burkina Faso at US, to mar the relationship between Ghana and Burkina Faso. President Mahama is trying to repair that, relations. And if the coup d'etat in Benin has succeeded, we will have a different twist in terms of how the region will look like politically. Again, the influence of France in West Africa will also reduce drastically, which means that now we will have a more coordinated resistance against French imperialism in West Africa. Now we'll have 4 countries forming an alliance to resist French imperialism in West Africa. And all this is if the coup d'etat takes the character as in Niger, Mali, and Burkina Faso. Beyond that, we also have a coordinated, fight against terrorism in the sub-region. And that is the only way we can fight these terrorists, to have a coordinated fight. All the time we are being deceived that, France will want to help you, US will want to set up military base just to help you fight terrorism and all those stuff. But we are not getting results.
They are the ones sponsoring the terrorism.
Of course, obviously. Obviously, and I made the analysis. The presence of French military, shows the high levels of terrorism. It's like having a plumber in an area who always, when he comes around, there's a plumbing fault in the area. I remember I used to live in a neighborhood in Ashanti region where there's a plumber who was known that in the night he will come and bust the pipe. Then in the morning he's called to come and repair it and take money. There's a similar thing that is happening in the sub-region. France comes in to say, we want to help you. Yet, they are fueling these terrorist actions. So we will have a coordinated fight against terrorism in the sub-region. And that is if and only if the coup d'etat takes the character as in Benin and as in Niger and Burkina Faso. So all in all, for me, my view is that, look, what matters most is the interest of the working people of West Africa. And as far as any governance style benefits the interest of the working people of West Africa, for me, I am in for that governance style. Talon was practicing democracy, yet it wasn't benefiting the working people of Burkina Faso, Benin. And so it's about time we rethink about the system of governance in these West African countries. And look, the other countries in West Africa must also sit up. It's about time they realize that you cannot take working people for granted. You must prioritize the interests of working people. And when you take them for granted and you reach a certain level, you may not be able to control it. And so the countries like Ghana, countries like Nigeria, like Cote d'Ivoire, and all those countries must begin to prioritize the interests of working people in their countries, in their respective countries. And for me, I think the whole solution to this whole problem, is that we need to move beyond these artificial borders, and my co-panelists have made mention of that. We need to move beyond these artificial borders. These borders were artificial. And Comrade always makes the point that there's a house in Togo, that the hall is in Ghana, and the bedroom is in Togo. So how can you convince me that these are two different countries? These are one people. And so it's about time we go back to the declarations of the 1945 conference in Manchester and pursue an agenda of African unity with one currency, with one army, with one passport, and be able to live together as one people under the broad banner of scientific socialism. I think that's the only way we can end this whole coup d'etat, this whole, authoritarian regimes, and this whole shoddy democratic governance that we have in the continent. We need to unite Africa under the broad banner of scientific socialism in a way and a manner that will benefit and fit the aspirations of working people within the continent. Thank you.
Thank you.